Culhwch and Olwen, which is a love story. But what I found most interesting in revisiting the tale was the history of Goleiddydd and Cilydd, who are Culhwch's parents, and the story about Goleiddydd going mad in her pregnancy. And this probably struck a chord with me because I was pregnant at the time. I didn't go mad in my pregnancy, in case anyone's worried. The only madness associated with my pregnancy was the fact that I did it again. So anyway, moving on to Goleiddydd's story. Rather than making her mad, I wanted to investigate what would make a woman perhaps want to run away or want to disappear during this strange time in her life. It was on a day when Goleiddydd was at her most visible, more visible than she'd ever been in her life, that she seemed to vanish into thin air. How could you lose a pregnant wife in a supermarket? That's what people were asking. Cilydd watched the news item every night in a stupor, as if he were watching a story about someone else, as if it was some other unfortunate being he saw snivelling into his fleece at the press conference, eyes at half-mast. "We are all concerned for my wife's safety," he heard the sap say. "She is 9 months pregnant and very vulnerable." Very vulnerable. How Goleiddydd would have hated that. She had never been vulnerable in her life, let alone invisible. She wasn't a woman you could miss, a splay of wild red hair twirling like a tornado around her small, perfectly formed face. A woman who walked in bold, quick strokes. It was always you who had to step aside, never her. But as she had prophesied, the pregnancy changed her. As she grew bigger and bigger, she somehow retreated into herself, became half the woman she had been, even as her flesh doubled. Her red hair stood static on her head, became a matted pink mess. She walked as though trudging through treacle, the whole world around her a gloopy, arduous struggle. She was all too visible, and yet ever so slowly disappearing. It had been a Saturday afternoon. She was waddling around the cheese aisle at the time, perusing all those pearly triangles she'd been denied for so long, staring at the blue threads of Stilton as though they were her own veins. He was at the checkout, buying snacks from the maternity ward, sugary lollipops to help her in labour, little treats to help him through the night, and those maternity essentials for the things no one wanted to think about. And as there was still no sign of her by the time he reached the entrance, he waited by the toilets. After 30 minutes, he'd grabbed the elbow of a tiny, white-haired pensioner and pleaded with her to go in and check for him. And when that proved unfruitful, he'd gone back to the car. He'd sat inside with his snacks and breast pads, reading the fine print on the pack of maternity towels before scouring the supermarket one last time. There was an announcement going off repeatedly, calling someone to the flower aisle, and he wondered for a second if he should request such an announcement for Goleiddydd. But he could imagine being scolded for it later on. So embarrassing, Cilydd, to have my name called out like that, as if I was a missing toddler. And so he left it, went to his car, and drove home. Leaving the supermarket, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as though he were leaving the whole sorry situation behind. She's at home, he thought, with great certainty. He was convinced of it. Of course, she's at home. But when he arrived home, the house was dark and empty. He sat there until all the light had drained from the room. Goleiddydd. Her name a combination of light and day, those bright, hopeful things. He recalled how, last Christmas, in the days before the pregnancy, she had beckoned him to the window to see the sun rising over the snow, her face alight with childlike wonder. She was always showing him the light in things, the whiteness. When they first met, it would pain him when she left the room, as though the lights were leaving too. The day she disappeared happened to be the shortest day of the year.